All right, Niall, what's in your notes today?
Well, today we have to pay attention, close attention, to the Middle East. The agreement that was supposed to halt the catastrophe in Gaza is hanging by a thread, and the way in which that situation is being reported tells its own story. But first, some context. President Trump is trying to hold together the deal that he announced with great fanfare less than 2 weeks ago. On Air Force One yesterday evening, Trump insisted that the ceasefire does remain in place. Here he is.
We want to make sure that it's going to be very peaceful with Hamas. And as you know, they've been quite rambunctious. They've been doing some shooting, and we think maybe the leadership isn't involved in that. You know, some rebels within. But either way, it's going to be handled properly. It's going to be handled toughly, but properly.
The real importance of those remarks, politically speaking, is Trump's obvious reluctance to blame Hamas's leadership for alleged violations. That's in keeping with a Trump administration line that has, so far, been a bit fairer than many people, including me, had expected. I was one of the reporters on a call last week with senior US advisors who indicated that they were basically satisfied with how Hamas had stepped up to meet its side of the ceasefire bargain so far. That's a far cry from the line that has been pushed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other members of his government. Itamar Ben-Gvir, a man who appallingly serves as Israel's national security minister despite past convictions for supporting far-right terrorism, is already demanding a return to Israel's assault on Gaza with, quote, full strength. You might not have heard about that, and therein lies a problem. For as long as I can remember, the American mainstream media's tendency has been to foreground Israeli perspectives and to sideline or minimize Palestinian ones. That often manifests itself in a tendency to be naively credulous of Israeli government narratives. And it can also be seen in a willingness to focus on Israeli civilians' hopes, fears and anxieties, while barely acknowledging those same emotions in Palestinian hearts. There has been, quite understandably, for example, a focus on the fate of the Israeli hostages, including those who are deceased and their families. And that's as it should be. The trauma there is on a scale that most of us cannot even imagine. Yet similar trauma has also been inflicted on huge numbers of Palestinians, whose suffering tends to get a lot less attention, at least in American media. Palestinian bodies are being returned too, 150 of them so far. According to the Associated Press, Israel has, quote, neither identified the bodies nor said how they died. Some are decomposed and blackened. Some are missing limbs and teeth. Here's a video that's circulating widely on social media, but which I at least haven't seen on any mainstream American media. It's Palestinians at a meeting trying to identify if any of the bodies they're seeing on screen, many reportedly bearing signs of torture, are their loved ones. We see this same pattern again and again. At least 97 Palestinians have been killed since Trump's ceasefire deal was announced. 97. And here in the US, we've heard almost nothing about them. More than 40 are reported to have been killed on Sunday alone. Here's some of the distressing aftermath of that. Again, not from a mainstream American organization, but from Middle East Eye.
مش وقفة الأقمار الحين؟ إيه؟ مش وقفة الأقمار الحين؟
بس مش عارفين وين الهدنة. بيكذبوا هم بيكذبوا، والله بيكذبوا علينا، كله كذب في كذب في الشهدنا، كل هالقصف والهذا في الشهدنا، كذابين كذابين، قتلونا.
وين كنتوا؟ وين كنتوا؟
مخيم في أصداء، مخيم في أصداء. أخوي مش عارف مش وضعه، مش عارف وين هو أخويا، ولاد أخوي لسه مش عارفين وينهم، وبنتي تصوبت.
The issue here isn't just the downplaying of Palestinian suffering, it's the downplaying of Palestinian perspectives more generally. How many Americans know that the last time we had a ceasefire in Gaza, it was Israel that broke it, in March? Or that as I speak, the crucial Rafah crossing into Gaza remains closed at Israel's order, slowing the flow of desperately needed aid. aid that was promised immediately as part of the deal. Or that in Gaza, the local authorities say Israel has violated the ceasefire 80 times already. These are important facts, and far too often in American media they go unheard. We all hope for the best in the Middle East. If peace took hold, it would ease catastrophic suffering. But we're a long way from that right now, and we need to see reality as it is, not as Mr. Netanyahu and his government would like to make it appear.
Yes, it was reported over the weekend that so there was this explosion that was initially attributed to Hamas, but the U.S. knew from the get-go, despite Israel's claims, that this was an unexploded ordnance, basically that a construction company had disturbed, not a attack by Hamas, and so when the Israeli government tried to say, oh, they're violating the ceasefire, actually our people, Trump's people, said, no, that's not what it is. Stop. The enormity of the difficulty of the task is trying to, constrain the behavior of a government that comprises many elements that want to keep fighting the Palestinians. That's not what we want, and we've done virtually everything we can reasonably do. I would certainly go further. I would cut off the aid entirely to Israel and anyone else. I'm broadly pleased with how Trump has handled this. I think better than many of the alternatives might have handled it, or somebody else in his place. But yes, it's very difficult because of the elements in the Israeli government.
Sure.
Social media in some way has gotten around the need for the mainstream media to cut, these images make their way into people's social media feeds on X without the media even needing to cover them. And I think that has obviously caused shock and outrage among ordinary people who are Democrats and Republicans who have put pressure on the leaders of their parties to stop the violence because they see it directly and they don't need CNN or the New York Times to show them the images. They can see them directly.
Yeah, no, I think that is an important point, and it is one of the things that has been prevalent in this particular conflict or assault or whatever you want to call it, more so than other armed conflicts. I mean, partly because social media just proliferates all the more as time passes, and TikTok was not a thing the last time I can remember there being a major conflict of this kind of nature. So all of that, I think, does serve to bypass, to some extent, the mainstream media. I do still think that it is important to note that, in general, the mainstream media, even when it is reporting on the politics of this, I think tends to default to, if not an exact Israeli position, certainly a position that is more sympathetic to the fundamentals what Israel wants to see as the fundamentals of the conflict, rather than what the Palestinians would see as the fundamentals of the conflict.
Of course, I think the more pro-Israel side thinks the media coverage is excessively negative toward Israel, which goes to show you just can't make anyone happy. I've thought I've gone in all different ways on this over the past 2 years, and it's made me obviously just sad and frustrated about what's happening and just wanting the U.S. to be less involved because this is a difficult problem to solve. I don't know why it's our problem. We don't need to be this closely aligned with Israel. We don't need to be being dragged into greater Middle Eastern intervention. And I think Trump has tried to disentangle himself, but it's obviously quite difficult because we keep ending up back in the same place where the ceasefire gets violated and there's more violence and it goes on.
Just very briefly, if the hope is for the United States to extricate itself from that conflict, I think it's pretty obvious that Trump does have to maintain focus and maintain a pressure on Netanyahu. Otherwise, the US will inevitably get sucked back into it in a position that, in effect, backs up what Netanyahu wants to do.
Well, there's more license for Republican leaders to go a different strategy now than ever before, given how universally opposed to closer ties or greater support for Netanyahu now exists among MAGA Republican identified people. The sentiment has shifted very rapidly in the last several years, and now there's license to do something else. It is not Ted Cruz's position on this issue is not representative of where the American right is. Tucker Carlson's position is representative. All right, Niall, what's in your notes today?
I'm glad you asked, Robbie, because another day, another revelation about Donald Trump. The New York Times revealed yesterday that Trump is demanding that the Justice Department pay him $230 million or thereabouts. The enormous cash haul would settle his complaints about the various prior investigations into his conduct. Now, let me be clear from the start. I don't think the government should be paying anything. The investigations themselves were valid. But the bigger issue right here and right now is that Trump is seeking a payout from a government that he himself controls. The massive check he's looking for would be issued by a Justice Department atop which he has installed his loyalists. Attorney General Pam Bondi and her deputy Todd Blanche both previously represented Trump as personal lawyers. And the Times also notes in its story that the head of the DOJ's Civil Division, Stanley Woodward Jr., represented Trump's co-defendant, Walt Nauta, in the Mar-a-Lago documents case. Woodward and Blanche are particularly important here because, according to the Times, they would be the ones to approve a settlement. One more detail from the Times story. Its reporters note that the DOJ doesn't even necessarily tell the public as soon as it settles the kind of claims Trump has made. Quote, if or when the Trump administration pays the president what could be hundreds of millions of dollars, there may be no immediate official declaration that it did so. This is an amazing situation in all of the wrong ways. Naturally enough, Trump was asked about it. Here he is responding to Caitlin Collins of CNN yesterday.
The New York Times is reporting that your legal team is seeking $230 million from your own Justice Department now in response to the investigations into you. Is that something you want your legal team to do?
I don't know what the numbers are. I don't even talk to them about it. All I know is that they would owe me a lot of money, but I'm not looking for money. I'd give it to charity or something. I would give it to charity, any money. But look, what they did, they rigged the election. And as you know, we had, in one case, 60 Minutes had to pay us a lot of money. George Slobodanopoulos had to pay us a lot of money, and they already paid. You know, they paid me a lot of money.
Firstly, nobody rigged the election. Second, I'll come to the media cases he mentioned there in a second. But go ahead, Mr. President, with your analysis of the ethical issues.
That decision would have to go across my desk, and it's awfully strange to make a decision where I'm paying myself. In other words, did you ever have one of those cases where you have to decide how much you're paying yourself in damages? But I was damaged very greatly, and any money that I would get, I would give to charity.
I hope you heard what he said there to one of the people standing by. Did you ever have one of those cases where you have to decide how much you're paying yourself in damages? No, I can't say I did. Most of us didn't either, because we don't hold presidential power and therefore can't leverage that power in a blatant shakedown like this. Perhaps we shouldn't be that surprised by all of this. Trump's critics are often focused mostly on the threat he poses to American democracy. But one part of that has always been all about the Benjamins. Trump's case against CBS, which he alluded to in that clip we just played, was over a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris. His claims would have been laughed out of almost any court in the land. But CBS's parent company, Paramount, needing the approval of Trump's FCC for a merger, settled the case for $16 million. They got their merger, Trump got his cash, and Bernie Sanders correctly called it government extortion. How about Trump's assault on law firms? Well, that's yielded rich pickings too. Back in April, Trump announced 5 firms would provide $600 million in pro bono work to causes that Trump supports. Colleges have caved too, albeit to the government rather than to Trump personally. An August story, also from the Times, found that Trump had personally interceded in settlement talks with Columbia University in May to insist the college pay up to the tune of $200 million. It agreed to do so as well. We don't even have time here to delve into the numerous ways Trump and his family have benefited from his grip on power. A New Yorker magazine investigation over the summer put the gains of his family circle across both his terms as president at a stunning $3.4 billion. One more thing. Trump's claim that if the DOJ settled his claims, he would give the money to charity. Way back in 2016, a reporter who's done some of the best work on Trump's finances, David Farenthold, looked into Trump's claims of charitable giving. A months-long investigation, he wrote in the Washington Post, quote, has not been able to verify many of Trump's boasts about his philanthropy. Farenthold brought the receipts, or rather the lack of receipts. Quote, Trump promised to give away the proceeds of Trump University. He promised to donate the salary he earned from The Apprentice. He promised to give personal donations to the charities chosen by contestants on Celebrity Apprentice. He promised to donate $250,000 to a charity helping Israeli soldiers and veterans, but the Post has been unable to verify that he followed through on any of them, end quote. Colour me shocked. Donald Trump is, as I've said here before, an aberrational president, unusually mendacious, unusually vindictive, and certainly unusually authoritarian. But he's also a grubby and greedy little man. And now he has his fingers in the pie at the Department of Justice, trying to claw out as much cash as he can get. What a time, Robbie. What a time.
I expect the ACLU to represent him in his quest to sue the government and get justice. I mean, I love when the government gets sued. Of course, there is an obvious conflict of interest here in that yes. Trump is himself a government figure, and the people he picked to run the Justice Department are loyal to him and have worked for him in the past, which is perfectly appropriate in terms of them being in the government itself, but represents a conflict of interest in this case. Most of the examples you cited, I would complicate in various ways. He, like anyone else, can bring a defamation lawsuit against George Stephanopoulos, etc. And I support suing the government. It is interesting because the doctrine of qualified immunity... Yes, but not when you are the head of government. The government, yes. Then it's just kind of looting. So this is not good.
Right.
But because of qualified immunity, this is more than a little interesting to me. There's a general... so this is this principle that basically it's very hard to sue government agents if they do something wrong to you, and everyone from police officers to public teachers to government bureaucrats.
In the course of their official duties.
Right, in the course of their official duties, but in effect what it does is vastly tip the scales against you suing the government for any sort of wrongdoing. If they stop you, routine stop, and you're, for whatever reason, have some cash in the back seat, they'll take that. That's gone. You're never getting that back. Sorry, that's over with. Even if it was totally inappropriate for them to take it, those kinds of things. So again, I'm generally sympathetic, but we'll see. That doctrine might harm Trump here, but of course he can just direct them because they're his people to make the payment, which is not a good thing.
I think that individual citizens who have been harmed by the government... Let's make it easier for
citizens to sue
then that is fine. What I think is just gross and obviously corrupt is Trump doing it. And remember, this is taxpayers' money at the end of the day. It is him having installed people who are extremely loyal to him, making the decision as to whether they will just ladle over millions and millions of dollars, $230 million or so, to the president. I mean, it's an absurd situation.
I know, but the really only very reliable check on something like this happening is at the ballot box. That is the ultimate check on this kind of behavior. And I think liberals, Democrats, people who oppose Trump have very much tried to go with a variety of procedural checks or prosecutions or investigations, whereas the ultimate, really the check available is the one they can't seem to use successfully, which is just that you have to run someone who does not manifest these qualities and defeat them in the election.
Well, except that one of the checks that was available was indeed the courts, and Trump successfully delayed 3 of the 4 cases against him so that voters who were at the ballot box did not know what the verdict in those cases would have been. That's a bit of a problem.
Well, the other substantive check is Congress's own ability to impeach and remove the president, which was attempted but failed because there's not enough members of the party having won election. So it still comes back to a democracy issue.
Well, and also the Republican Party did not stand up, in my view, to democracy.
Lindsey, what's in your lens today?
Well, of course, we're talking about Jasmine Crockett. Now, she isn't just in the conversation. She is the conversation in Texas politics right now. She hasn't even announced a Senate run, and she's already leading the Democratic field. That's not buzz, that's leverage. Now, Crockett told SiriusXM's The Lori Daniel Favors show that she, quote, will strongly be considering a run for U.S. Senate. And that's not, the motivation isn't ego, it's really backlash. Texas Republicans pushed through a mid-cycle redistricting map that moved Democratic Representative Jasmine Crockett out of her own district. And even though she says she and her team are waiting for the court to issue a final ruling on whether the new lines in these districts will go into effect, Crockett isn't exactly the go quietly type. As she put it, quote, if you want to take my seat of 766,000 away, I feel like there has to be some karma in that, to where I take your seat that is for 30 million away. This is not just a revenge tour, it's strategy. Democratic voters, especially voters of color, are tired of polished speeches and poll-tested emotional restraint. Crockett built a national following by sounding like actual people do when they're fed up. When Republicans tried to censure her earlier this year, it only boosted her authenticity. Beltway insiders heard, quote, too brash. Voters finally heard somebody fighting. And that's what makes her viable in a state Democrats haven't cracked statewide in 30 years. She's not promising to turn Texas blue by being polite, but by expanding who shows up. She said it plainly, quote, the primary is the primary. That's cool, but you gotta win the general. So we're doing some testing here shortly to see if I can expand the electorate. And the numbers back her up. In an NRSC poll, important note, Republicans commissioned this poll, it shows her leading with 35% support among Democratic voters. A University of Texas Houston poll showed her at 31% ahead of every other potential candidate, including household names like Beto O'Rourke. And this is the part that pundits keep missing. If Democrats want to win Texas, they don't just need a candidate with ideas. They need a candidate who sounds like people who stop voting. The millions who feel unheard, overcharged, and politically unseen. The ones who tuned out after 2024 because nothing in politics sounded like them. To them, Crockett doesn't read as angry. She reads as accurate. If she jumps in, she's not just testing the electorate, she's testing a theory that connection matters more than caution, and that the loudest candidate might finally be the one speaking for the people who've been quiet the longest. In other words, Texas might not be changing parties, but the party might finally be changing its voice.
Well, the Democratic Party already has two interesting candidates in this race, Colin Allred, who ran against Ted Cruz last time around and lost, and this James Tallarico guy who made a big splash after being on Joe Rogan. And if Jasmine Crockett gets in the race too, it'll be really fun and interesting.
You have a smirk on your face. Jasmine Crockett, she's already polling super high. She's already doing well. And that's among Democratic voters, but she said she's testing out. I mean, when you think about the whole redistricting drama that we had all summer, for you guys to put her in a district that she doesn't, not you guys, for Texas Republicans to put her in a district that she doesn't even live in, you should put her on your TV set because she has good information to say, but that's beside the point.
I'll enjoy having her on my TV set.
I'd love to see her debate. Yes, she. What are you like talking like the kids?
No, I think it'd be very entertaining. I think she very well might win the Democratic nomination, and I think she would get utterly destroyed in the general election. But we'll see. Well, I mean, I think they're all going to lose. Texas is a red state. The idea of blue Texas is a pipe dream of the Democratic Party. I think all three of those candidates will lose. Maybe, unless, I guess Republicans, they have their issues because it's Ken Paxton is seeking it, and he's kind of a nut job. He's not great. So Republicans get in with some crazy person, and then Democrats, if they have a nice moderate person, they could win. I don't know that Jasmine Crockett fits that bill.
Oh, I don't think
I think they're more likely to hold the Senate seat if she's the candidate. So
I would say that voters are
her.
not like clutching their pearls anymore. Democratic voters are looking for somebody who represents the voice of speaking up, and I think that's why Jasmine Crockett, no matter how much
Hot Wheels.
No, Trump has said worse. Okay, please, let's not even go down the list.
Trump
don't act like you don't understand. He said it's worse.
Excuse.
I'm just people are matching fire with fire. When you're angry, you say stuff that you don't mean. You always talk about not combing through people's old tweets and things and holding them accountable.
Tweets? You said this
for the
like
rest
a month ago.
no, you said for the rest
5
of their
months
lives.
ago.
One thing doesn't count for the rest of their lives. So let Jasmine Crockett. Trump has said rude things. He's the leader of the Republican Party right now. Jasmine Crockett is matching fire with fire. And some people who are fed up are like, you know what? This represents how upset I am. I don't think that's the way to go. I'm an individual, but I'm just telling you, just like you're an individual, I'm sure you don't like everything that President Trump says, right? We can agree.
I certainly do.
Okay, so then therefore some people, the same way that you have an affinity to the policies, appreciate Jasmine Crockett, her policy, her boisterousness, her loudness.
Okay, but you're celebrating her for her boisterousness, not really.
No, I'm celebrating the Democratic Party for finding a voice in Jasmine Crockett. The same party that was voiceless after Kamala lost is finding a rising star, specifically over 2025. She has gained traction. I'm celebrating that they have something. I'm celebrating
not for her policy ideas. Like I prefer Donald Trump's policies for the most part, although I have serious disagreements with him on trade and immigration. I prefer his policies to Democrats' policies, so I support him to the extent I support him over Democrats.
And Jasmine Crockett more aligns with like AOC and Bernie Sanders, right?
Yeah,
she's a populist. So I'm just telling you that's what her policies are. So being that adamant and not being maybe as nice, like Bernie Sanders has a nice way of saying it, right? He does it a diplomatic way. He's been in politics for a long time. Jasmine Crockett might be an extension of that, except the one that's fed up. And people are like, those together kind of makes sense. You remember how well Bernie Sanders was doing when he was polling against Biden and when he was actually being considered to be the Democratic candidate for president. So that Jasmine Crockett's not that far off. She could polish up in a few ways, but if Trump wasn't expected to polish up, I'm not sure why Jasmine Crockett has to when she's going for a lesser position.
Did you know that her colleagues
Okay, some people hate AOC, and she's also set herself up to run for president if she'd like. So, people hate a lot of people. A lot of Trump's colleagues, newsflash, hated him. They didn't want him to move forward.
Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore because they had to fall in line. Sometimes that's what the party needs to do. And if we go with Jasmine Crockett's strategy of just taking the bulls by the horn, or if we go with the Democrats' original strategy, which is to find and pay millions of dollars for a new Joe Rogan, and the strategy they laid forth, which has been nothing of substance, I think Jasmine Crockett might be a good leader to follow as they try to figure out what their voice is.
I have to stop myself. I don't know why I'm arguing with you. You're right. You're right, Lindsey. Jasmine Crockett should be the face of the Democratic Party.
Why did you change course?
Should be the
Thank
nominee.
you.
What am I saying?
Why did you say that? Why did you?
Yes, Lindsey.
Maybe she should run for president.
Let's pass over James Talarico and have it be, directly for president. I agree.
Everything.
Jasmine
go to president.
Crockett on every ballot would be, yes, I am for this. I am for this. And on behalf of MAGA, your terms are acceptable.
Okay,
what am I doing?
I'm happy that we swayed you over to the
fully on
the
board.
actual right side.
I'm getting on board now.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Lindsey, what are you seeing in your lens?
Let's get to it. So inflation is rising. Again, hiring is slowing. And voter confidence in the economy has dropped to one of its lowest points in years. So federal data expected this week shows annual inflation hitting 3% for the first time since the Biden administration, a full point above the Fed's target. Driven largely by higher energy and food costs, the areas Americans can least avoid. Now, at the same time, job growth has fallen from an average of 150,000 new jobs per month this year to about 25,000 by August. Research from Goldman Sachs economist Elsie Pang estimates slower immigration, reduced government hiring, and cuts to federal contract funding are costing the U.S. roughly 100,000 jobs each month, amplified by uncertainty in trade policy. Now, with those conditions piling up, Trump's numbers on economic management are slipping sharply. According to a September Quinnipiac poll, just 38% of voters approve of Trump's handling of the economy. Now, Quinnipiac University polling analyst Tim Malloy called it, quote, a low watermark for a president who promised a vibrant and muscular economy. The White House, however, argues the opposite. In a statement to The Hill, a spokesperson said, quote, President Trump's economic agenda has tamed Joe Biden's inflation crisis, delivered real wage growth, and secured trillions in investments to make and hire in America. But a clear picture of what's actually happening is harder to confirm because the government shutdown has frozen nearly all federal economic reporting, except the CPI, meaning the country is effectively flying without instruments. Now, analysts warn that if the shutdown drags on, the blind spot grows and the economic fallout will eventually deepen. Meanwhile, the administration's foreign economic choices are drawing heat from both parties, especially the $20 billion support plan for Argentina's currency markets alongside a pledge to buy Argentinian beef when U.S. ranchers are already struggling with rising costs and shrinking herds. Beef prices are up 16% this year. Senator Deb Fischer said she expressed, quote, deep concerns to the White House, warning Nebraska ranchers, quote, cannot afford to have the rug pulled out from under them. Now, Senator Mike Rounds added that, quote, opening the market to even more foreign beef would only exacerbate the problem and hurt domestic producers. Trump defended the move on Truth Social, arguing, quote, the cattle ranchers who I love don't understand that the only reason they are doing so well for the first time in decades is because I put tariffs on cattle coming into the United States. Now, the broader economic story is becoming harder to spin. Inflation is trending up, job growth is trending down, and farmers, the core of, quote, America First coalition, are now publicly questioning whether we're being put behind foreign allies. And that's the tension defining this moment. It's hard to run on America First when American workers keep ending up second.
All right. So, Lindsey, I'm glad you brought up this Argentina bailout. This was
a huge deal yesterday.
It was,
today and yesterday.
It was. And it's something that obviously America First people are very critical of the president for, and I think for good reason. I don't have as much of a sour picture on the economy as you do, though, as we do know this report that came in this morning on CPI saw it actually coming in below expectations. It was expected to hit 3.1%. It comes in at 3.0%. Markets are responding very bullishly in response to that, with futures skyrocketing. We've also seen a lot of other numbers that I think bode well for the general trend of the economy. Obviously, overall, inflation is too high, but compared to the 9% peak during the Biden administration, this has a lot of Americans feeling much more positive about their economic futures. According to a poll from Morgan Stanley that came out recently, inflation concerns among Americans are down to their lowest level since 2022, and confidence in economy and household finances was up 36% from 33% the prior month. We also see, as we head into Thanksgiving, of course, turkey is at its lowest price since 2019, and Thanksgiving baskets are expected to be $14 cheaper than last year. Energy was down 1.1% in July and gas down 2.2%. So while they slightly ticked up this month, still far below where they were at the beginning of the year. This is obviously a long-term economic strategy with the tariff policy, but I think the fact that inflation is staying relatively stable is a good sign that it isn't having this massive inflationary effect that most people anticipated.
Now, you know, during Trump campaigning season last year, there was a lot of talk about how people felt. You remember Biden and his team were on the campaign trail saying, no, you don't feel what you feel. The economy is doing better. And so I just want to be honest with the conversations that I'm having with Americans in cities across the country that I've been to in recent months. People feel really uncomfortable. I mean, articles that I've read. So we can see the numbers. It's the same thing, the same game that we hear from President Biden. We can say these numbers and we can argue about polls that change every single month. But people, I don't think relatively are feeling like this economy is boisterous for them. They don't feel very excited about where they are, especially when you hinged voting. Some people who were on the fence hinged voting for President Trump on the fact that he's the businessman. He's going to change things for us and he's going to turn this around. And the promises were kind of overpromised and underdelivered when it comes down to that. And so people just don't feel like they're in much more of a stable position. Plus, when we think about some of his immigration policies, they've affected farmers around the country, not to mention this Argentinian beef, which we can get into. People are like, even though it might be a small amount, if you look at the exact number, people are like, why are we going outside of the country to supplement a problem here? We need to figure out ways to support local farmers. But also immigrants worked on farm lands. In Pennsylvania, they were complaining about some of the policies making workers just either quit or be fearful to come to work. And so they have to explain that to employees. Even highly skilled workers don't want to accept programs that usually would offer them a smooth transition into the U.S. because of how much immigration is under attack right now. And we've seen companies report that in the past, and people who were thinking about taking those positions from places like China or other countries saying, well, we're going to hold off for a second. So I think when you think about that, plus the uncertainty of tariffs, there is a relative concern about how people actually feel and then what policies are going in place, not to mention the big, beautiful bill and how that brought up our debt and it made people concerned about who are American workers, some of the most vulnerable, concerned about some of their medical coverage that are now exacerbated and concerned about because of these COVID era policies about to end. I think a lot of Americans have a lot of stress on their mind around economy and finance. And in this moment when the government is actually not working and shut down, people are probably pointing the blame at the person who holds the highest honor, which is the president of our country.
Well, I think you make an important point about how people feel versus the numbers, and that's totally a valid point to make. And I'm not saying that the economy is where it should be, but I do think some of the dire predictions from experts and economists are really overblowing the situation. On the immigration point, I do think it's important to, of course, delineate between illegal immigration and legal immigration. And one of the things that is often frustrating for American workers is that they see large corporations, and most of the farms that use illegal immigration are part of large corporate conglomerates. They have an opportunity to have seasonal agricultural visas, but instead they've decided to hire under the table, and American workers' wages get suppressed as a result. So at the same time that we're seeing job growth stall a little bit because of the lack of illegal immigration, as well as these federal job cuts, we also see real wages rising pretty significantly throughout this first 10 months of the Trump administration. And that's really why people voted for him, was because they were sick of wage stagnation. They were sick of their wages being suppressed by illegal immigration. So this is precisely in line with what they wanted him to do.
And I think the overall, his tactic you may not agree with, but the overall goal is to bring everything back home to America. But some people just don't know about this long game in this moment where the economy doesn't feel that good to be trying this out right now.